Hey everyone, welcome to Make Room. This video on game making is a behind-the-scenes look at the Instructor game for the April 2020 challenge. Today I'm talking about enemy AI. So in previous videos, you've seen Dan take you through the basics of setting up UI and a structure of points for this game. Today I'm going to focus on what we did to set up our enemy zombies who wander around in this city park and subtract some life from your player character when they get nearby. Okay, so to set up a zombie like this who walks around automatically, you need to first start with your enemy game object. And I made the decision to use a zombie because I thought a zombie would be a funny choice, given that these guys are stressing us out with the risk of getting sick, probably with the coronavirus. So to get the zombie in the scene, of course, I visited my Toony Tiny People folder in the project. I opened the prefabs folder, and here I found my zombie mesh or model, and I dragged him right into the scene. We'll delete him because we already have one right here. Now, once I had my zombie in the scene, I needed to set him up with some AI or artificial intelligence capabilities. And luckily, a lot of those capabilities already come built into Unity. So to enable him to act as an artificially intelligent agent, all I have to do is add a built-in Unity component called a Nav Mesh Agent. What this enables this game object to do is to wander around in a game level automatically and recognize both where he can and cannot walk and what he can and cannot run into. I'm going to have to write some code that tells him to go walking, but once I've written that code, he'll do his navigation and movement automatically without my explicit coding and help. So adding the Nav Mesh agent turns this guy into an automated enemy. And my next step, in addition to adding all of the usual components we use for a game object in a scene that's subject to physics, such as a rigid body and some colliders, I also need to set up the environment itself so that he knows where he can walk. So corresponding with this Nav Mesh agent on the zombie, I also need to bake a Nav Mesh on the floor of the park. And I can do that by actually opening the navigation window. I've got it open here. And you can open this too by going Window, AI, Navigation. And then I highlight everything in the scene where I want my Nav Mesh to bake. So in this case, I'm going to highlight the parent game object that contains my entire environment here. You can see it's called Nature Park, and when I move this in and out, of course, you can see I'm dragging most of the things in the scene. We've got a few lagging objects here that belong in this parent that aren't there now, but it's going to be good enough for me to bake a Nav Mesh agent for this zombie to walk on. So clicking on Nature Park in the hierarchy, I click Bake in the window here to the right. And then here at the top of the scene window, I click on this word that says Gizmos, and my Nav Mesh is displayed. So if I zoom in and look here, this blue field is all the places where the zombie can walk. So once I've got that system set up, I've got my Nav Mesh agent on the zombie and my Nav Mesh on the floor. I'm ready with my Unity components and I can start to code. Okay, so here I am in Visual Studio. I've got my enemy AI script open, and I'm going to take you guys through the logic I used to make my zombie walk around and do some interesting things while the player is also playing the game. So what I decided I wanted my enemy to do was to wander around in the park somewhat randomly, but I also wanted my enemy to have a slight preference for walking towards the flowers. I thought this would be a good algorithm because for the most part, we want an even distribution of zombies moving somewhat unpredictably across the map, but we also want the flowers to be a little bit increasingly difficult for the player to access, so the difficulty of the game goes up over time. And the way I set this up was to write a couple of different methods. So my usual Unity script here, I've got my variables at the top. I've got update here, which is my continuously running method that happens once per frame. And then at the bottom, these methods that I added in myself. So let's start with my methods. First of all, I added a method that finds a random point in a sphere around the zombie. So this logic right here is selecting a point from within this random sphere around the zombie. And then it finds the nearest point to that point that is on the nav mesh covering the floor of the park. Once it's found that nearest point, it sends out that point as a return value of the method, and I can cause my zombie to walk in the direction of that point. So this method here deals with semi-random movement within an area surrounding the zombie. So in plain English, when this method is called, the zombie walks in some direction from where it's standing. My second method here is a very short method, which is the onTriggerEnter method. It's a standard one that comes built in with Unity. And what I wrote here is some logic that says, if I run into another trigger who's tagged flower, I stop moving. And what this does is, even if the zombie would have continued moving normally, he stops when he hits a flower. And then he waits a good bit of time before he moves again. So, whereas ordinarily the zombie would walk, stop. Every time he hits a flower, he goes walk, flower, stop. Walk, flower, stop. So, when this zombie hits a flower and stops, that's creating a preference for the zombie himself being near a flower, because the flower causes him to stop walking and stand there when ordinarily he'd have moved in another direction. So with these two methods, we've got some logic here in update. We've got a timer running, and of course this timer's ticking down and throttling when the zombie moves and when the zombie stops. So we've got walk, stop, with flowers causing a stop to happen early and a longer wait. And then finally, we've got some logic here that manages the zombie's animation. No need to superanalyze this. It simply says if the zombie is moving, we said is moving to true. If he's not moving, we said is moving to false. And then the animation is triggered accordingly. This is just to make the zombie look like he's walking when he moves on the nav mesh. So with this script coded up, and of course, like any script, I never would write one like this from top to bottom, but rather developing this a few lines at a time and testing it out once I've attached it to the zombie in the scene. But of course, here in Unity, I'm going to need it to be attached to the zombie. So here, of course, is my zombie in the scene. And that script I just showed you is attached. Let's minimize the Nav Mesh agent right here at the bottom in the inspector. if you looked carefully at my script, you'll notice I did include some public variables that let me set certain parameters here in the inspector. I've got the zombie's radius, which is, of course, the radius of the sphere within which he picks a random point to walk to. And then my wander timer and wait timer are controlling for how long the zombie walks on each wander, and then how long he waits when he comes to a stop. So some nice parameters here to help me adjust gameplay when I'm ready for that. But in the meantime, let's see how this setup works in the game. So he should be around here somewhere. There he is. And as you can see, he's walking, he's walking, he's walking. Let's see when he stops. Oop, he turns around. And still walking, and now he stops, and then he starts walking again. So maybe I could adjust some parameters if I want him to stop for longer. Looks like he only stops for a very short amount of time, and he walks for a much longer interval. But what I've got going here is exactly what I want. I've got an automated person. He wanders, he stops, and he animates when he is moving. Also, as you can see with the Nav Mesh agent, oh, he's got the fence, walking into the fence there. So some definite tweaking we could do to debug this in the future. I don't have colliders on here, so I can walk through a lot of the environment. But you'll notice, because I've baked the Nav Mesh in this particular way, he can't walk past the fence, and he'll also naturally avoid some of the obstacles that I can walk through. So see there, he doesn't walk through the fence. That's because when I baked the Nav Mesh, it automatically evaluated that fence as an obstacle and prevents the zombie from walking there. It's pretty nice. Okay guys, so that's how you set up enemy AI. Stay tuned as I develop this game continuing forward, and hopefully we'll see some fun gameplay develop with lots of zombies and some thematic game design to turn this simple little UI into something really compelling.